Hello, it's Nachu here.
Today, I'm going to explain a horror thriller movie called The Seeding. Ew. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens in a desolate desert in Utah, where we see a dirty child wandering and eating a severed human finger. Shortly after, we meet a protagonist, Wyndham, who is driving into the same area. It turns out he is a professional photographer who has come here to capture the eclipse. He climbs a very difficult rock and eventually finds the perfect spot to set up his camera. Not long after it, the eclipse begins, and Wyndham captures a few stunning images. He then decides to leave and heads to his parked car on the roadside, but just then, he notices a kid crying alone in the distance. Wyndham asks what happened, to which the kid reveals that he got separated from his parents and is lost. Feeling worried, Wyndham asks him to come to his car so that they can look for his parents, but the boy suddenly stands up and walks in the opposite direction, claiming that his parents are there. This confuses Wyndham, who makes a mental note to bring candy next time, but he can't let such a young boy go alone, so he naively follows him. After walking for a while, he realizes that it's getting dark soon and asks the kid to turn back, but strangely, the boy begins to insult him and then runs away. This leaves Wyndham in a dire situation, as it's getting dark and he's a long way from his car. He tries to find his way back to the main road, but eventually gets lost. He even attempts to call someone, but there's no service in the desert. Shortly after, Wyndham is startled when he hears a woman singing in the distance. He follows the sound and soon sees a cabin at the bottom of a canyon. He also notices a retractable ladder leading to the cabin, which he carefully descends. When he arrives, he knocks on the cabin door, and a woman named Alina answers it. Wyndham explains his situation, but the woman isn't surprised by his presence. She casually invites him inside and offers him food without saying much. He then asks how to get out of here, but Alina doesn't respond at all. This leaves Wyndham frustrated, and he tries to leave, but she insists that it's late and asks him to stay. With no other option, he agrees and lies down on a nearby bed. Wyndham later notices Alina getting naked and cleaning herself in the other room. This weirds him out, but he doesn't dwell on it much and closes his eyes. The next morning, Wyndham leaves some money for Alina and proceeds to leave. However, he is shocked to see that the cabin is surrounded by steep cliffs, something he hadn't noticed the night before. Even more shocking is the fact that the lower part of the ladder from last night is gone. When Alina wakes up, he asks where the ladder is gone. She nonchalantly responds that the locals sometimes take it for their use, and it may be returned later or tomorrow. Wyndham then inquires about other exit routes, but Alina informs him that there are none. This frustrates our hero, and he is forced to stay another day there. He spends most of his time photographing the landscape and the scenery. He also attempts to climb the cliff, but the heat makes it impossible for him to do so. In the afternoon, Alina offers to clean his clothes, as they have gotten very dirty. When he refuses, she asks what his wife will think of him, seeing him in this condition. The statement weirds out Wyndham, and he quickly clarifies that he isn't married. The next day, he searches through Alina's house for anything that will help him climb. He eventually finds a pickaxe and tries to use that to climb the rocks, but moments later, some children suddenly throw a severed animal head at him, as children are wont to do. This causes him to lose his balance, and he immediately collapses to the ground, unconscious. When Wyndham awakens, he discovers that it is already nightfall. He's in excruciating pain and realizes that he's accidentally embedded the pickaxe in his leg. Wyndham starts screaming for help, and this finally catches Alina's attention. She rushes over to him and carefully removes the pickaxe while he cries in agony. Moments later, Wyndham passes out once again, and Alina takes him back to the cabin to treat his injuries. 2 days later, he feels a bit better and once again tries to get out of there. He looks up at the top of the canyon and screams for help, but no one comes to his aid. Enraged, Wyndham drags Alina outside and demands to know what's happening. She doesn't respond to his question, but assures him that she can care for him and feed him. However, Wyndham angrily tells her that he just wants to return to his normal life. He claims that he has a life outside this world and that people are dependent on him, like desperate models and families who like dressing their babies up like pumpkins. Alina tries to get closer to him, but Wyndham refuses and asks her to leave him alone. Shortly after, a boy named Corvus and his sister arrive at the top and call out to Wyndham. Corvus reveals that he heard the shouting earlier and asks if he needs help. Wyndham is very relieved by this and explains how he's been stuck and needs to get out. In response, Corvus assures him that he has rope and will be back soon. This makes Wyndham feel hopeful, and he eagerly waits for the boy. Corvus soon returns and throws the rope down, asking Wyndham to tie himself to it. The latter naively obliges, after which Corvus and some other boys begin pulling him up. However, they abruptly stop halfway and begin mocking Wyndham, who is now suspended in the air. They torture him by swinging the rope back and forth, and one of them even unsheathes the willy and pees on his face. As a result, Wyndham ends up hitting a rock and losing consciousness. They try to inflict further damage on him, but Alina suddenly appears and scolds the boys in their local language. This prompts them to quickly run away from there. Later that night, Wyndham awakens to discover himself in Alina's bed. He gets up and tries to leave once again, but he's too weak and soon falls to the ground as he cries in frustration. Alina advises him to accept his fate and adjust to this new life. Wyndham then asks about the teenage boys and why they were so mean to him. In response, Alina says that they're just stray kids who were united by the desert. She tells him not to take it to heart, as they are just stupid and bored boys. The scene then cuts to a few weeks later, where Wyndham has accepted his fate and is peacefully living in the desert. Alina also takes good care of him, and he is moved by her efforts. One day, a teenager brings her a package containing food and other necessities. This surprises Wyndham, and he wonders where the goods came from. However, Alina believes it's better not to ask and simply enjoy what's been provided. Hearing this, he suspects she's also a victim like him and has been forced to stay here. That evening, a drunk Wyndham hears commotion outside, so he goes to investigate with a hammer. He soon comes across Corvus. He's dressed as a woman. After keysing the man for a while, Corvus grabs his hammer, licks his face, and flees. This enrages Wyndham so much that he returns to the cabin and begins yelling at Alina. He blames her for allowing these psycho boys to control their lives. However, Alina doesn't respond, as usual, and suggests that he should sleep or perhaps grow some balls and take care of himself. She then moves to her bed and begins to clean herself while naked. Seeing this, the drunk Wyndham also succumbs to his desires and becomes intimate with her. Days later, as Wyndham is busy in the garden, a boy named Lepus calls out to him from the top, asking what he's doing. Wyndham responds that he's farming, and that, despite living in the desert, he has realized the pit is almost a microcosm in itself. When the boy asks about this microcosm, Wyndham reveals that it refers to the concept of forming small life in a larger place. Lepus is impressed by his big words and expresses a desire to study such topics as well. Wyndham agrees to teach him, but asks for his help in exchange. However, the boy seems very nervous and quickly walks away. Later, at home, Wyndham notices a vintage photograph of a woman and asks Alina who it is. She reveals that it was the first mother who came to this location. Wyndham doesn't understand, but Alina suddenly shocks him by announcing that she's pregnant. She also assures him that he isn't required to care for them if he doesn't want to. However, Wyndham accuses her of tricking him and insults her by saying he doesn't want his kid to be raised by an inbred psycho woman. His words deeply hurt Alina's feelings, who didn't trick him into shit, especially not forgetting how to pull out, and she bursts into tears. The next morning, Wyndham is jogging around when Lepus returns and talks to him. Wyndham asks for his help, stating that the woman here is pregnant and they must go outside. He requests Lepus bring rope and mentions that this will be his first physics lesson. The boy seems interested, and Wyndham further convinces him by saying that once they escape, they can all live as a family. Lepus agrees to help, but insists that he must do it while the others are sleeping. Unfortunately, another teenage boy overhears the conversation and takes Lepus away from there. Later, at home, Alina questions Wyndham about what he was discussing with the boy. He reveals that Lepus is kind and intelligent, unlike the other psychos. However, when he mentions how Lepus is promised to help with the escape, Alina becomes upset. Wyndham also shares that once he leaves, he will travel, have freedom, and eat a cheeseburger. Surprisingly, Alina doesn't know what a cheeseburger is because she has never been outside. After they fall asleep, we see the teenage boys dressed bizarrely and performing a ritual on the edge of a cliff. When Wyndham and Alina wake up the next morning, they are horrified to see Lepus tied to a rope above the canyon. He is dead, and we see that his back has been ripped open. Alina screams in terror and yells that brothers don't do this to each other. She also accuses Wyndham of allowing her son to be killed and gets angry before he can understand what she's saying. Alina attacks him and eventually knocks him out with a piece of wood. The scene then cuts to a few months later, where we see Wyndham locked in a cage like an animal. Alina, who is now heavily pregnant, gives him water and food just to keep him alive, but doesn't speak much otherwise. One afternoon, afternoon, Wyndham notices a female hiker at the top of the canyon and attracts her attention. He begs for help and urges her to call the police immediately. She tells him to wait while she makes the call, which fills Wyndham with some hope. However, shortly after, he sees Corvus capturing the woman and killing her brutally. Wyndham begins to hit the cage in frustration, realizing that he'll never escape this hellhole. That evening, a small child approaches Wyndham in the cage and hands him a fruit. He accepts it and begins eating, which soon causes him to become disoriented. Shortly after, he notices Alina and the teenage voice engaged in a cult ritual in the distance. He then realizes that these boys are actually Alina's children, fathered by various men. During the ritual, Alina stands with leaves over her eyes as the boys dance around the fire. Days later, as winter begins to set in, Alina brings a blanket for Wyndham in the cage. He takes advantage of this opportunity and begs her to release him. He states that he doesn't want to go back to his former life and is ready to raise all these children with her. However, Alina makes it clear that she never really cared about him. All she needed from him was his seed, and since the child is now conceived, he is useless to her. She reveals that the only reason she's keeping him alive is that she's waiting for the birth of their child. The next morning, Alina starts having contractions and feels excruciating pain. She immediately releases Wyndham from his cage and begs for his help. She admits that she's in a lot of pain and has never experienced this before. Despite everything that has happened, Wyndham cares about his child and decides to help Alina. But moments later, he notices the teenagers throwing a ladder into the canyon for his escape. This puts him in a difficult situation because Alina is in pain and needs him, but it is also his only opportunity to leave. In the end, Wyndham decides to abandon Alina to her fate and heads towards the ladder, but he soon stops when he hears the sound of the newborn crying. He immediately turns around and embraces his daughter with joy. Wyndham momentarily forgets all the torture he endured and rejoices in fatherhood. After this, Alina takes the child back and promises to feed and take care of their daughter. She says that the child will one day fulfill her purpose and become a mother. She thanks Wyndham for fulfilling his role and says that his part is now over. He gets confused, but just then one of the older boys slits his throat from behind and kills him. In the final scene, Alina packs Wyndham's belongings and puts them in a trunk. She then approaches her crying baby and tries to console her. Outside the house, we see Wyndham's corpse rotting on the ground. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.